Hi guys, it's me, Bleaks. Today I'm going to do just a really quick tutorial on my 3 different levels of kind of like finish, but it's 3 different approaches to doing the same picture, but we're going to show you the commonalities between them and sort of how, you know, all pictures can kind of be started the same way in a lot of ways. There's like I've studied a lot of different like methods for making pictures, and it seems in general like everybody kind of follows the same basic principles. Even when I was in school, my professors in traditional art would do the same sort of things. So the first thing we're going to do is start with a sketch. So make sure that I have enough room there. Probably not, so I'm going to just increase the canvas size a little bit using the crop tool, which is a very fast way of resizing your canvas instead of going into the image adjustment. Okay. Good enough. Okay, so I think what I'm going to start with is just a really quick rough sketch of a character. What character am I going to draw? How about me, Bleats? It's me, Bleats. Nah. Just cause it's easy. So in general, you know, you start your kind of construction lines. Oh, I did this on the wrong layer. Blah, 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 blah. And you can, you know, you can start with like whatever. You can start with colored lines. Sometimes people find it easier if you're sketching in, like, let's say blue lines. It makes it a little easier to see your inking sometimes. You know, for me, a lot of times I just work in black, you know, just try to keep it light in a lot of ways. But yeah, working lighter can be helpful. And I'm not gonna labor over this sketch too long. Because this is really about method, not about drawing. So we can do other videos on drawing and stuff later. Yeah, so I'm roughing in just a basic sketch. I don't know if you guys can hear that on my recording, but my house is like super creaky. Everyone says my house is haunted because it just is constantly creaking floorboards and odd random noises. So I tend to try to clean up the sketch as I go sometimes. Some people call this line sculpting. Where you basically rough in the shapes with like a bigger brush, and then you kind of erase out, and the erasing refines your edges, and yeah, it sorry. Refines your edges, and it also sort of deals with a little bit of shading at the same time, because in general, like, shadows kind of are on the edges of your object, and so that's what lines kind of represent anyway. So your black lines in a picture, they don't really represent outlines around things, because nothing in nature has outlines, you know. a lot of times people, you know, they make a distinction between lineless pictures and not lineless pictures, or paintings, I guess, or lineless pictures, which are paintings, and like, you know, lined pictures, which are more like comic book style or like anime style or something like that. It's not really, both of them start in the same way, really. So I don't really like the distinction that much between lineless and lined, because in general, outlines are useful, and if you tell yourself that you're not going to use lines, I'm going to do a lineless picture, don't use lines, then you're kind of you can make it really difficult on yourself, you know. Eye is real big, but I told myself it wasn't about the sketch. I told myself I wasn't about the sketch, but I'm doing it anyway. Alright, so this does not need to be a very detailed picture. But in general, I try to sketch kind of clean. And then in my quickies, like my quickie level, this is sort of where the lines end. I don't really refine the lines too much. And actually, I do like to work a little bit in shading, just a little bit. Just because it kind of helps me like think about like where I'm going to be putting shadows and things like that. And then you can also use your sketch layer as part of your tone when you're doing a quickie layer. But all three methods are going to use the basic sketch. So here's the basic sketch. I'm a goat. Yeah, so here's me, Bleats, looking like a dumbass. Okay, so I have my basic sketch down. I'm going to duplicate it 3 times to show you using the same sketch to do each level. So when you zoom out, you can see this sketch actually looks pretty refined in a lot of ways. It is rather refined, which is why I stop here with quickies. So when it comes to doing quickies, I let the roughness be okay. You know? Oh wow, I don't like his horn. Horn on that other side is a little bit too tall. Let's shrink that down a little bit. Oops, did that in the wrong layer. I'm so stupid. It's super early this morning, and I just got out of bed like 2 seconds ago, and I have 2 sips of my coffee in me, so caffeine is not kicking in yet, but that's okay. I woke up this morning just thinking about you guys, thinking about all the things I could do to teach you guys or show you guys something or learn or practice myself, and I don't know. I've been thinking about you guys. You guys are always on my mind. Okay, let's duplicate this again. Blip, 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 blip. Okay, so line and color, or not line, the quickie level. So I'm going to grab a gray because that's the color of Bleats' skin or fur. I'm going to put this line layer on a multiply layer, which just darkens everything below. This is really useful because if your lines are a lighter color, you know, then yeah. So generally I start with the darkest color. Another way you can do fills is you could take a really hot color, like let's do like this pink color. Looks real ugly, looks really crazy, but it helps you to see where the edges are. And I'm gonna hand draw this in. So I'm not using any selection tools. I'm not using anything. I'm just using a paintbrush, and I'm using just feathered, soft, kind of airbrushy brushes for everything. This is not a hard edge brush. It's got some softness to it. So yeah, you just draw in your silhouette. Now all of them start like this: sketch, silhouette, shading, and cleanup, or overpainting, as some people like to call it. There's different names for all the different levels, you know. But in general, you start with a sketch, then you do a silhouette. This silhouette lets you, it's just the outline of the object inside of it. This gives you a lot of advantages. So I can take this. Above, there's a lock button above all the layers in Photoshop. If you hit this first one, it locks the transparency. Now that the transparency is locked, I can draw, and it's never going to go outside that silhouette, so it locks that silhouette in place. So I can be very loose, very quick. I don't have to belabor anything. I also don't have to worry about reestablishing the edge, which is the most important part. So once you've established your edge, you want to use it as much as possible. You want to make sure that you're not doing extra work. The worst thing would be to have to go back around the whole object, and try to keep within the lines every single time, which is kind of how you start with coloring books and stuff like that. When you're a little kid and you're drawing in coloring books, you have to kind of stay in the lines every time, But with these digital tools, you don't have to. And even traditionally, there's all sorts of methods that people have devised to do this. In watercolors, in water-based mediums, a lot of people will do liquid latex that you can use a paintbrush to paint the latex in to the areas you don't want the paint to go. And then you can just do big washes and paint to your heart's content, and you don't have to worry about that edge. Always maintaining that edge, because the latex will just resist everything. And then in the end, you just use a kneaded eraser, or you can even just use your finger to just pull the latex off. And then you can paint where the latex was too, so you can do more washes and stuff. But it basically makes it resist. You can also cut mylar, or zipatone, or any of those kind of masks. They're basically like big stickers that you use an X-Acto blade to cut the sticker to the shape of the background, or the thing you want to mask out, and then you work around it without any fear. So you're basically making a mask. So airbrush, same technique, using stencils or anything like that. It's a way of maintaining that edge that you have. So yeah, even traditionally, this method is kind of the basic method that everyone uses for everything. So it's like I said, there's I'll show you when we get to the painting levels and that it's really the same process. So Quicky is basically like this, just adding some color, and then a lot of times with a Quicky, I will just take a really basic airbrush and I just kind of scrub in a little bit of shadows, not too much, because it's a Quicky. It's supposed to be quick. Thus the name. And I'll give myself a little blush, because I'm always blushing, because I'm socially awkward. Because, I'm a furry. Most defining characteristic of any furry, socially awkward in some way. Maybe not in all ways, but in some way. You too suffer from social awkwardness, I can tell. Okay. And then, I'm just going to do a really quick... Oh, why? Why would you do that to me? I'm just going to do a really quick background. color back there. And then oftentimes I will do this little really quick trick of putting in a gradient in the background. And one of the reasons that I like doing these kind of gradients is that it will hide a lot of your black line work and make it, you know, make it not so obvious. Yeah, so that's a quickie level done. All right, now we're going to move on to the inking level, the line and color, as I used to call it. So in this one, we take this basic sketch we have. We're going to use the hue saturation. I'm going to click on colorize, lighten it, and take the saturation up a little bit, and we're going to switch it to a blue line, because we're going to get rid of all these lines. We're going to go over this again. This is why HighPolish, I call it HighPolish, and the reason and the reason it costs more money on my commission levels is because it has a bunch of extra steps to it. So this is how I do all my comics. All my comic books are done with this basic method. Okay, so I grab my inker, whatever my preferred inker is. The inker that I like to use, mainly for comics, is 100% black. A lot of people don't like using these. They like having things that have that feather in transparency. They have a brush that's kind of like this, you know, or has like a more like a soft edge, you know, like this. Which is nice and can hide a lot of flaws, and it gives you a lot of help using soft edge brushes. But the reason that I use a 100% hard edge brush is because it helps me flat, and I hate flatting. Flatting is very time consuming and very boring. It's not a creative part of the drawing. And the thing about flatting that is toxic for me is that whenever I get into something that's kind of automatic, something that's more mechanical, something that's less creative, I don't have decisions to make. I'm just coloring, like paint by numbers, you know? When I get into that mode, it can sometimes sabotage like the rest of the day's drawing, because I'll start getting out of the creative mode of thinking, and I'll just be in this sort of robotic, automatic, you know, precious mode, you know, where I'm like worried that everything has got to be like just right, and you know, I worry about all my, you know, edges, and that's why, I mean, so I've done a lot of graphic design in my life. I used to be a graphic designer for a number of years, and oh man, graphic design can be very toxic if you are a drawer or a figure person or narrative person. Not that you can't learn some skills from graphic design. It's a very useful skill to have, but it generally uses different parts of the brain. And so in graphic design, you are always sort of precious and editing, and you're like, you know, you're thinking about like preserving all of your, like, you're non-destructive. I hear a lot of graphic designers talk about that all the time. Like, you don't want to have a destructive method of editing. You always want to edit non-destructively. Most artists don't think about non-destructive or destructive, and the reason is that if you're a creative person, you're not really you're destroying, like, you're using the eraser tool to like destroy something that you didn't like, and you're just going to rebuild it. A lot of times graphic designers are using photography or existing images that they didn't create, you know, fonts that they didn't create. They're a stylist in a lot of ways, you know. A graphic designer is somebody who's using their taste to decide whether something is good or bad. They're making a judgment about, like, I like this color next to that color. I don't like that font. I do like that font though. I don't like that picture. I do like this part of this picture, but I don't like the whole thing, so I'm going to cut it out. You know, like, it's all those kind of decisions. And that's a good thing to learn. It's a good thing to you know, have taste. Everybody has to have taste and develop it. But in general, like, judgmental thinking or mechanical thinking or any of that kind of stuff is toxic when you're working creatively, because it kicks you out of the creative mode. It makes you just, you know, sort of think about things in a more linear sort of way, you know. And so that's why I don't like flatting or any kind of mechanical process. It generally puts me in this graphic design frame of mind, and then it's hard to get out of it sometimes. You have to like focus and concentrate and try to remind yourself that you're in that mode. The problem with like the editorial mode versus the creative mode, where like you're kind of free and playful and like enjoying yourself, and the other one where you're like, you know, judging and you're weighing and you're being very you know, kind of diligent but closed-minded, I guess, is that you don't know when you're in one of the modes oftentimes. You know, you don't. It's hard to recognize when you're in it, because your brain is working the way you think it's supposed to work. It's not unlike if anybody suffers from like any kind of mental illness, you know, like depression or anything like that. Like when you're in a brain state, it's hard to recognize you're in the brain state, you know, because you just think this is always the way that you think, you know, but it's not true. So being able to recognize when you are thinking a certain way is really important, you know. So I always try to manage my state of mind, you know. So got my inking done, and now I have this like old sketch that I used that was like the basic thing of the Quicky. I'm going to completely get rid of it. So now I just have this. And actually, I don't like, I'm going to use a mechanical tool here, which I don't usually do, but I'm going to use a mechanical tool right now and just do these eyes with a perfect circle, which is not always a good thing to do, but it, you know, I feel like that gives you kind of a Disney quality in a lot of ways. They tend to like make the pupils perfect and very round. Which has a cleanliness to it. Yeah, so, you know, in general, like, one of the reasons that this method takes a little bit longer is that you're doing cleanup. However, it's faster than a Quicky in some respects. So they all have different advantages and disadvantages. So one of the major advantages to this style is that once you have this inking done, oh man, you can flat like crazy. You can really, so I'm just going to select around the object, and it gives me the silhouette almost immediately. So I'm selecting all the negative space that's around it, then I'm going to select, modify, expand by 3 pixels. What this does is it brings this marching ant line into the middle of my lines. So it's not just around the edge. It's around the outside, or it's so then I invert, select, Control I, or invert the selection. So now I'm just selecting the inside of it. Now I can just use my paint bucket, which is amazing. I can just grab like, I don't know, like a dark gray, whatever, boom, silhouette done. So I didn't have to hand paint around all the edges. I can just silhouette like that. And one of the great things about doing this on a comic book level is, in a comic you have tons of different characters. They have lots of different colors all going on inside of them. If you take your the magic wand tool and the paint bucket tool work exactly the same. One just fills with color and the other one just selects. So paint bucket tool, anti-alias, contiguous, and all layers clicked on. Tolerance level 60. Sometimes I go to 80. and opacity 100%. So I have my lines on a layer above. On the layer below, I'm going to use the paint bucket tool. Boom, fill that in. Grab the gray. Boom, 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 done. Boom, boom, done. Boom, boom, done. Boom, boom, done. That sounds like a really bad song. So there, like flatting took me like literally like 10 seconds to do. And there's cleanup you can do. You know, like you can see there's some edges in here, some little gross little white edges. When I'm in comic book mode, I do not worry about those. I leave them the way they are, because that silhouette that I made it a dark gray. You can make it any kind of dark color you want. Oh, I forgot to do my eyes. Made me look really creepy there. Grab a white and turn this back on, and boop, boop. Now, when I turn my silhouette on, it hides all those little gross edges, because it's a dark neutral color. They're still there, but they're completely invisible for the most part to the naked eye. Ooh, naked eye. Also, this this method, because I use that 100% 100% hard brush, I don't have to use the multiply layer. I can literally just leave that layer black, and then you can also, if you want to, you can like color the lines. You know, some people like to color the lines. You can lock the transparency on the lines, and you can, like, you know, you can color the lines if you want, which kind of hide them a little bit more, make them look a little bit more like a painting or whatever. Okay, so once I have this method done, I'm not going to color the lines, I don't think. I don't color my lines for my comic book in general, just because I kind of like that graphic look sometimes. Okay, so I have this done. Now I'm going to take this whole silhouette, duplicate it, make it 100% black, turn it to a multiply layer, reduce the opacity to something like, 40, 45. This is going to become my shadow layer. Now inside this layer mask that I make, so I make a black layer, set it to multiply opacity 40%. Then at the very bottom, you can see this little square with a circle inside of it. That makes a layer mask. There's a way to do layer masks in Sci and other programs too. It's the same basic principle. And this is like doing a wash. So in traditional media, I've seen people do things like do oil wash, where you'll take a turpentine and oil paint, and you'll mix it together, and it'll become like your shadow color, and you'll just brush it over the whole surface, and then you kind of let it dry a little bit and get a little tacky, and then you can use a kneaded eraser to pick out your highlights. You can do it with chalk pastel, where you brush over a pastel, like a dark blue or something like that, like pastel over the whole thing. And then you, again, use a kneaded eraser or something to pick out the highlights. There's a bunch of different methods, like this kind of reverse shading method. You can do it in pencil with just rubbing graphite all over the paper, or charcoal, rubbing charcoal all over the paper, making this like kind of patina of darkness, of shadow, and then you use an eraser to draw in your midtones, like this. This is a super quick method, and I've developed this method after doing a couple hundred pages of comics. Just this is my comic method for a reason, because it's efficient. It's fast in a lot of ways, really fast and efficient. It has more steps than the Quickie level, so it takes longer than the Quickie level, because the Quickie level you're really just coloring your sketch. But I'm going to show you in the painting level, you color your sketch too. You don't do this inking at all. You don't do any of this cleanup. You certainly could, but I find it to be not necessary. Okay, so I duplicate this layer a second time, the silhouette. Now I make it 100% white, and I put it on an overlay mode. make a layer mask, same way. And this time I hit Control I, which inverts the mask, makes it black instead of white, which makes it completely invisible. Now you can draw in your highlights. Draw in those highlights so you can work positively. We were working negatively before, where you're erasing out. Now you're drawing in all your highlights. Also, the eye is kind of like a curved thing, so like your internal highlights on the iris are going to be on the opposite side from the little dot that you're using to show where the light is shining at it, because the iris part is actually concave. It's a dish, and the outside of the eye is a dome, you know? So as the light comes in, it hits the highlight, and then it passes through, and then it hits the inside of the eye. Anyway, yeah. So you know, I can work on this shading a little bit more. Really, like, you know, refine it, make it look really nice. It depends on how much time I want to spend on it, and you can work both positively and negatively on this if you want. You can draw in a lot of times, like for hair, I'll draw in a big shape like that, and then I'll erase parts of it out, like kind of like similar to the line sculpting that I was doing earlier. It's just you're like shade sculpting, kind of. Yeah. So, you know, HighPolish has a very clean look to it, you know? It has a very kind of clean finish. It looks almost like metallic in some ways because it doesn't have a lot of texture to it. I can combat that, you know, I can add texture if I want to. Oh, gross. I need blush. Also, because you have your silhouette layer still untouched and unshaded, let's say I want to do that blush again, right? I can just grab the gray, modify, expand, 3. So now I just have the gray selected. If I want to draw that blush in like really big and I don't want to worry about my edges, I can just like paint right over the eyes. It's not going to go into the hair. It's not going to go anywhere else. This is also really helpful if you want to do like tiger stripes or something like that on your different furry characters, you know, like if you wanted to draw like tiger stripes, you wouldn't worry about it like going outside of the edges that you've established. One of the huge benefits of doing this in a comic is that if you have characters that are very complex, you can always edit inside all the different zones. So you're just kind of like, you're creating like a base layer for yourself that you can use to kind of like select different areas. It's a really useful technique, very useful technique. And that's why I've sort of developed all these methods. So like the Quickie is good for knocking out an idea really fast and giving you a basic idea of what the final is going to look like. Like that looks, if you zoom way out, you know, they don't look dissimilar to each other, you know. You get the idea in the first one for sure. Like you can tell that, like you can tell everything that's going on in the second one is happening in that first one. It's just when you zoom in, it's like real rough because it's just a colored sketch, and this one's a lot cleaner. Now for the painting method. So the final method, the painting method, I leave this sketch the way it is. Now, if I wanted to do a silhouette, a lot of times I'll clean up some of this edge a little bit, you know, just kind of clean up the edge. And you still want to start with a silhouette. You still want to have a silhouette of some kind. You don't have to. In a lot of ways, like it's superior painting style to not have a silhouette that you lock yourself into, but it's such a useful thing, especially if you're doing a more complex picture. If you're doing a portrait, I can see it not being that important. But I'm just kind of refining the edge just a little bit. Just refining these edges a little bit. But it doesn't matter that much. So I'm making sure that there's no holes, and I'm just giving myself a basic silhouette to use. Okay, that's probably good enough. Where's that? It's on that layer. I'm going to drop this almost all the way down to the bottom. Yeah, it's on the bottom now. I'm going to grab all these and hide the other ones. Okay, so now that I just have this on a white field, the reason that you want to isolate the thing you're trying to do a silhouette of, because this does not have a perfect edge. Unlike the inking method where like I have like a perfect inked edge, this does not have a perfect inked edge. But if I grab my magic wand tool, anti-alias, contiguous, sample all layers, I'm going to take the tolerance up to 80. Sometimes it's a little bit much. I'm going to select the outside, just like I did on that inking method. But because it's looking at all the layers, you can see like where there's these gray bits. It brings it in a little bit more. It ignores some of this gray. You know, if I set it to 120 maybe, and try it again, it's actually going to cut in almost perfectly into there too. So the higher you set it, the closer it's going to get to that edge. The only problem is if you drew some areas a little bit light, like let's say 170. Yeah, see, it's now found holes, like right here, you know? And so it will then go inside and just make a mess of everything. So changing your tolerance is basically like the point that you're clicking. So I'm clicking 100% white right now. So 120 shades of gray and hue shifting, so color shifting and tone shifting away from that white, it will treat as white, right? So this dark is dark enough that it's more than 120 steps away, but all those little grays fall within the purview of that 120. So either way, I got that silhouette, invert the selection. I can turn on all my other layers now. And let's grab that dark hoodie of the beanie. And I'm just gonna fill like this. Yeah. So you can see that I actually drew this in a gray, not a black. So I'm gonna take this whole selection and just darken it back to black. And with the painting method, it's really what makes a painting look like a painting versus like anything else is that the background and the foreground are much more sophisticatedly blended together. There's a lot more blending between the background and the foreground. So it's important to establish your background with a painting level, you know, pretty early. Like make sure that you know kind of what you're doing. So we're going to actually start this just the same way we did with the Quickie. So I made a silhouette, I've locked it, and now I'm going to paint in, you know, like all my local color. So local color versus anything else. Local color is the color that an object is in neutral lighting. So if you have a red shirt, you know, the local color is red. That's the color that like the object is in like natural lighting. If the lighting is neutral. In a painting, the lighting is almost never neutral. I mean, to make a painting look more like a painting, you want to get away from local color as much as possible, because what you're dealing with is global color. So you want to everything is going to be affected by the color that's around it, by the, you know, the light and the shading and things like that from the ambient light around it. So I got this basic thing going on here. With paintings in general, I find it much easier to start with a dark and build up your lights. That's what like artists like Rembrandt and things like that. That's how they would start. They would start with a dark, really dark background, and then they would just build up their lights. So now what makes this different than the Quicky level is that I'm just going to be building and building and building on top of itself. So I'm going to be doing overpaint, the overpaint layer, or the top layer, or the polish layer, or that final shading layer is all going to be on top of itself. So I'm going to duplicate that just for safety, but I'm going to take this whole local color layer that I have, and I'm going to start thinking about what the color around it is going to be. Now, there's probably going to be something like, let's say like a blue light, like a light blue coming in from the top. So I'm going to establish my light sources right now. I'm going to use a really kind of garish color or something that's really like a bright color. So this is sort of like the overall lighting in the room is this light blue or daylight. I could change it. Maybe we'll make it like an orange. We could drop the saturation a little bit. You know, maybe it's like a warm light. Yeah, I like that. Maybe it's a warm light instead. That just helps you get your thinking in the right way. And then maybe there's a little bit of like our bounce lights. So maybe he's on a ground. The ground is kind of a blue. So let's actually take that blue that we had established, and our bounce lights are going to be a blue. So this orange to blue. You can make these any color you want. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm going to drop the opacity of that as well. And I'm going to drop the opacity of this light layer too. Okay. So now that that's established, I'm going to take all my local colors and I'm going to darken them quite a bit. Quite a bit. And on this layer, you can actually just totally merge them together. So my sketch and my local color flat fills are completely one layer. So the one thing about the painting method is that like you can do this. You can work on just one layer, which is kind of cool. It's kind of good to do. So I'm going to make a little top layer. This is going to be like my overpainting layer, and I'm going to just start like brushing in highlights and stuff. It helps to work in texture too. It could be helpful to like work with like a textured brush for this kind of stuff if you want. Alright, now I'm just kind of like exploring, you know? Just like exploring stuff. And yeah, I might as well just do this all in one layer, just because it's like easier. So, and it's also it shows the difference between the two. So I'm gonna start by like laying in some shadows, you know, like darkening the picture even more. And generally, you want to work dark to light. You know, that's the most traditional way of doing things. So you start with your shadows, establish your light sources. Which I use gradient tools to just kind of like help me think about where my shadows are, but like you can just do it in your head too, or if you have a background, you know, the background can help you sort of like establish where those are going to be. And this is why it's called lineless a lot of times. You're not really worrying about the sketch that's underneath. You're kind of just like painting over the sketch in a lot of ways. You're overpainting. You're not caring so much about like preserving those lines. Like in the line and color, it's really important to preserve your lines because you want to use those lines continuously to make, you know, different kinds of like adjustments and things like that. So in this method, like I'm just painting like right over top of my sketches. You know, you can see like the sketch line, like I'm just completely lightening parts of it, you know, just ignoring the drawing in a lot of ways that I have underneath it. I'm just working with the color that's underneath it, you know. and it kind of can get misty and kind of like weird at points, you know, and you're kind of like, oh no, I'm gonna lose it. A lot of times painting can be stressful because you're kind of like, you can get lost, or you can feel like it's looking muddy because it you know, it's not a very like clear process every time, you know. But you can always just draw in again, you know. So like if you're losing lines, if you're like losing your lines in some areas, you can draw them back in. But in general, like, you don't want to like pay attention to your lines too much. You want to pay attention to the tone and the shadow, you know. I mean, it's you're worrying about like the edge to edge kind of situation. And this method is fun in a lot of ways because you have to constantly be creative. You have to constantly be in the creative mode. You're always thinking about you know, what's this, you know, like what's the tone supposed to be here, what's the tone supposed to be there. Where is that? There we go. And so, you know, you have to stay in that kind of like open creative mode the whole time, and that can be hard. It can be hard, but in the end, like, you're going to be rewarded for that freedom and openness. You know, you're going to have a chance to experiment in there. You're going to learn and grow and figure things out as you're working. And painting also can be very relaxing in a lot of ways because you can kind of noodle around and go, do I like this? Do I like that? Maybe I'll try something right here. Maybe I'll do a little bit of something there. And, you know, it also has a much more like rendered finish look to it, you know, which is really nice. The thing about painting, though, that is also difficult is, like, it relies on your experience of paying attention to how light works. It really shows how much you understand how light works around forms. I don't know it. I don't know light as well as I should. I mean, in a lot of ways, all painting, all art in general, is just a description of how light works. You know, it's a description of light with a line in color, or this kind of like comic book style. In a lot of ways, you're ignoring lighting. You know, you're focusing on the drawing aspect, and the drawing aspect is really about structure. It's about like, you know, what's like the wireframe of this object, you know, and that has value too. It's more of a design. It's more of a design kind of discipline in a lot of ways. Drawing is more like graphic design than anything else. Yeah. So, you know, if you want to be a good painter, you have to be a good looker. You know, you have to be a good studier, and see how light works on like the objects around it. You know, because you're building up from a really dark base. Paintings can tend to be a little bit dull sometimes, or a little bit like muddy. They take some time to kind of like pull the lightness levels up on them. There are tricks that you can use. Right now, I'm just using color. You know, I'm not using any like Photoshop tricks. But if you want some tricks, there's a couple things you can do by changing, like, let's say, the brush mode. You know, of something. So like, let's say I want to like globally lighten this whole object, you know, or his whole face or whatever. I'm going to grab like a big like airbrush. I have this whole layer locked, so you know the transparency is locked, so I can paint within it or whatever. Change the brush mode to overlay. Remember, I did the highlights on this guy in an overlay layer. So you can actually set that blending mode to your brush, and I'm just going to brush in some highlights. I'm going to brush in some areas of lightness. using that overlay method. And this is going to just globally brighten big areas of this. Now a lot of what this is doing is it's not giving me like really like what I want to keep as like my final, but it's like it's sort of it's giving me a dynamic range to work on. Now I'm going to turn this overlay back off. Now that I have some more lights built up, I can eyedropper select those colors and kind of work them into the rest of the picture. And you can render and render and render and render and render and render and render on like these on this sort of like this sort of layer. You know, you can just do this all the damn day. You can really, and you know, you're refining your edges and you're kind of crisping them back up. You know, and I'm still basically working on my midtones in a lot of ways. You know, you can work in some texture too. You know, it's good to like if you want to be thinking about texture, it's good to you know, sometimes use a textured brush instead of like an airbrush. I need to be doing that more. I need to be experimenting with textures, just because they help you so much. They give you a lot of just a lot of help, you know. In oil painting, you know, like you want to use your brights, like your bristle brushes, you know, a lot. They give you a lot of help. Instead of using like sable brushes for everything, where you're like using these smooth brushes for everything, you want to use like some rough brushes and allow yourself to lay down a ground of texture. You know, that's one of the things that's actually easiest about traditional. It makes traditional easier than digital, is that it's easier to manipulate textures in traditional in a lot of ways. Like it naturally has a natural texture to it. In digital, you have to think about what textures you want to add. You have a lot more control in digital over like the textures. You have a lot more control over like what textures you want to have in a picture. But nothing's given away for free. You have to really intentionally pick it. Like in a lot of ways, digital like has a lot of helpful tools, but also in a lot of ways like it's completely open for you to just do whatever you want to do, which can also be difficult and can also be like, you know, you're sort of like all on your own. You know, you have to like it's like up to you to make it cool. Like the tool unleashes you, lets you do anything you want. Well, within that can be a lot of anxiety or a lot of, you know, difficulty to figure out what do I want to do. Now that it's all on me, what do I do? With oil painting or watercolor, you know, like even if you're not a good oil painter or not a good watercolorist, like it's still going to look like an oil painting or a watercolor, you know, like at the end. Like you're still going to have some of the like watercolors especially. Like you can do a lot to just like lay in your washes and stuff like that. That will like make it look like nice and abstract and kind of loose and like pretty without you even doing very much to like the figure. You can just like let the water kind of just like deposit the color around, and like it'll look nice even if your structure is bad or your lighting's bad or like you don't know how to do this or you don't know how to do this. Doesn't matter. Like the technique itself produces a beautiful result, you know. Digital does not give you those kinds of things readily. You have to like find ways to make that happen, and it's hard. Digital in general, like, you know, it doesn't give you help in some ways. Some ways it helps you tremendously. You don't have to worry about cleaning up your brushes. You don't have to worry about like, you know, there's a lot of like mechanical things that it speeds up. You know, it makes things a lot easier. A digital picture is never ruined. You can always just keep working and working and working on it and bringing it back. Like I've added a lot of texture here and I've gone over the lines quite a bit. So I've obliterated a lot of the face. But that's okay. In painting you want to like move from the background to the foreground to the background to the foreground. You want to paint in stuff into all the different edges. You know, you want to make sure that like the color zones are non-distinct at first, you know. So you're definitely like you are obliterating the lines in some ways, but you bring the lines back, you know? Like, the lines, it's good to have, like, there's a strong line around his jaw, you know? And there's going to be strong lines around his eyes and nostril and mouth. But right now I'm kind of eliminating them a little bit just so that they're well blended, you know? So now I'm going to bring in some more edges now. So like I'll define the edge around these eyes. A lot of times watercolorists will do this too. They'll start with big washes of color, and then once the washes are done, you know, then they go in with a pen and they draw over and outline the edges of things, which makes it look like they drew it that way to begin with and then expertly filled in, but they actually started with the fills and then did the drawing at the end. Because I would always look at like some of these watercolor brushes and stuff and I'd be like, why is it that, you know, I can't get the same effect? Like I'll do the drawing, I'll lay down the ink, and then I'll put my wash over it and it'll just wash out the ink. This isn't waterproof ink. Like, how are they doing that? And it's like, because they waited for the picture, they did the wet part first, waited for it to dry, and then they did the drawing on top of the whole thing at the very end, which is a complete reverse of the way most people do things. Yeah. So this is basically the difference between these three different styles. And I haven't done a whole lot of global lighting really on this guy yet. I kind of like that they're all kind of looking, in general, similar toned. I say in general a lot. Isn't that weird? In general. Because I'm afraid to say definitive things because I'm never sure of myself. In general, this isn't 100% true. It could be different. You could argue with me. You could come up with a different method. I don't know. I'm an idiot. Don't listen to me. I'm stupid. Oh, insecurity of being an artist. I imagine many of you suffer that same feeling. Just like I knew you were all socially awkward, I knew you all secretly tear yourselves down. Every artist does. It's our curse. Actually, to be honest with you, when you're tearing yourself down, which I do a lot, it's showing that your editorial mode is strong. It's the graphic designer in you telling you to get better, to step up your game, to worry about what other people think, to care about judgment, you know? In a lot of ways, there's a reason why graphic designers, in general, well, the reason why graphic designers are usually more stylish than other people, or they have their finger on the pulse a lot of social trends and things like that. And they're generally very sophisticated, fashionable people, is because graphic design, when you're focused on the judgment aspect of it, what is the root of judgment? What do other people think of me? Right? That's the basic question. What do other people think of this? What are other people going to think about this? You're trying to anticipate other people's expectations. So that's valuable to some degree. I mean, you can sit there and think like, you know, if I were to show this picture to people, what are they going to like it or not like it? You know, you want to make pictures that people like. So, you know, you're thinking about your audience. You know, is that a bad thing necessarily? No, it's okay to think about your audience, but it will lock you up because, to be honest with you, your audience, they want to see you having fun. They want to see you making stuff that you like to make. If you're always thinking about what other people want, you're never going to give people what they want, which is you, the uniqueness of you in a lot of ways, you know? So this is why a lot of times, you can point to, I know this artist, I know that artist. This artist is a famous artist. That's a famous artist, but you can't really point to famous graphic designers that often. There's not that many. There are, of course, but there's not that many that most people know, because while they are fashionable and they have their finger on the pulse and they know what everybody else is doing and they know what the coolest people are doing and they're themselves being the coolest people, they're actually not setting a lot of trends. They're not being trendsetters. Artists are the ones who are being trendsetters because they're innovating and they're out on the edges doing things that nobody else is doing. And most of the time it's bad. Most of the time people think that what the artist is doing is stupid, and not paying attention to that artist. But like a lot of artists will break new ground that way. They'll do stuff that nobody else did. People make fun of them at first, and then people go, "Wait, that's really cool," and then that becomes the new trend. So, the artist is more on the innovation side of the scale, and the unique side of the scale. All right, so this is getting like maybe close to being done. Yeah, I was gonna put in a cold light on the right side, so let me just grab a little bit of bounce lighting, do it on the top layer, even though I was gonna do everything on one layer. Sometimes it's valuable to have an extra layer sometimes. These are very garish lights. These are very strong lights. I tend to work that way at first. I tend to put in my really, really bright lights, and I make really bold decisions because I know I'm going to knock it back later. And sometimes the bold decision is good enough. Sometimes it's what you want, but you get scared at first because it's a big change. You're like, whoa, it's a little too strong. But if you do it on a different layer, you can, and that's one good thing about digital too. The great teaching tool that is digital art is it allows you to be brave because you can always change it later. You can always undo it. You can always edit it. It's forever editable. No digital piece is ever ruined, You can always bring it back. So that gives you a lot of confidence, It teaches you a lot of bravery. Digital or traditional, I was always kind of worried that I was going to mess a step up and I wouldn't be able to go back and I'd ruin the picture, because you can ruin a picture. You put a big splotch of paint over top of stuff and it's gone forever. The thing you just covered up, gone forever. It's there's no getting it back, and that can be scary. And I find in general, if you want to be creative, if you want to stay in that creative mode, stay out of the designer mode, stay out of the editorial mode, you have to not be afraid to make mistakes. And so if you're doing anything with a method that makes you afraid of making mistakes, it's going to just lock you up. It's going to make you slow. It's going to make you timid. It's going to make your art less unique. It's going to do a lot of negative things. So fighting against that is extraordinarily important, Fighting against anxiety and fear. We all have anxiety and fear, it's something that we all struggle with. And it's the thing that you're trying to overcome, I mean, art is about truth, And if you're afraid of what other people think of you, it's harder to speak your truth. It's harder to be truthful if you're anxious, Deceit is a mark of fear, All right, and then I guess I'll just do these warm lights on top that I had kind of established. Yeah, and the painting, it's a lot of what makes the painting look better and better and better is what you're doing at the very end, And if you're staying sort of like creative all the way to the end, I can sort of like reestablish how this hair is going to go. You know, I can think about like editing things or changing things around. You know, you can very easily like kind of like modify large portions of the painting at the end. You know. Yeah, so I think that's pretty done. So yeah, you can see that like when you zoom way out, you know, maybe the painting I need to kind of like establish a little bit more of this nose end or whatever. I mean, like, you know, like you can obviously tweak stuff forever and ever and ever, but like, oh, I forgot to do the blush. Of course I have to have a blush. And I'm going to do this on a separate layer on the top because I don't have any of those masks that I can use. So I'm just going to brush it in over the top and then I'm just going to erase it out. Just erase that motherfucker out. Alright, so you can see the difference, right? Like when you zoom way out, they don't look that different. They look kind of the similar. They kind of the similar. But then when you zoom way in, you can see like this one doesn't have that much, you know, rendering going on. This one's maybe like a little like, you know, like especially when you zoom like way into these lines and stuff like that, it doesn't look that great, you know. It looks, you know, it's a little, from a distance it sells the point and it gets it across. And then when you look at the painting, it's like much more like, you know, rendered and detailed and sort of fleshed out and stuff. So yeah, so those are my three methods: Quicky, HighPolish, and painting. And you can see the difference between them and the different methods. And you can tell the time, right? Like the Quicky took me a few minutes, like maybe 10 minutes. The HighPolish one took me like half hour, maybe, you know, 20 minutes, something like that. And the painting took the longest, you know. This whole video has only been an hour long, so you know the three methods all compiled together still only took me an hour, but I think it probably took me half an hour to do the painting, 15 minutes maybe to do the one, and 15 minutes to establish the sketch and do the, I don't know what the times were because I wasn't paying attention, but whatever. So anyway, this has been Me Bleeds, and I hope this was helpful. And yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that, hit me up on Patreon or send me a note in FA or hit me up on Discord. Like, I'm around. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye!